The first thing that gives the Amazon its reputation is movement. Something lunges, something constricts, something strikes from below. But that expectation becomes a liability the moment you stop looking for motion and start touching the environment itself. In the dim, humidity-thick understory where light filters down in fractured green beams, the forest does not always attack by chasing. Sometimes it simply waits to be contacted, and the danger is already in place long before anything notices it. Along trunks glazed with moss, along leaves still wet from the last passing rain, and along branches that seem no different from any other, clusters of caterpillars rest in complete stillness, their bodies arranged like harmless textures in the landscape. Nothing about them signals urgency. Their shape is soft, their pace non-existent, their presence almost decorative. And that is precisely where the mistake begins. Venomous caterpillars in the Amazon are not built to hunt. They do not need speed, precision, or pursuit. Instead, they rely on a far more efficient strategy in an environment where contact is constant and unavoidable. The rainforest is dense to the point of physical intimacy. Every step brushes foliage. Every hand finds bark. Every movement closes distance with something else. Evolution has taken advantage of that closeness by turning passive surfaces into active defenses. The bodies of these caterpillars are covered in specialized spines, fine, hollow structures that act as microscopic delivery systems. To the eye, they appear like soft fuzz or decorative hairs, sometimes even arranged in patterns that mimic fungus, lichen, or harmless plant growth. But structurally, they are rigid, fragile needles designed to break on contact and remain embedded in skin. When a hand, forearm, or exposed patch of skin drags across one of these clusters, the interaction is almost invisible at first. There is no dramatic moment, no obvious puncture. The spines fracture instantly, releasing venom into the outer layers of tissue. Only seconds later does the body begin to register what has happened. A burning sensation builds rapidly, not sharp like a bite, but spreading, diffuse, and escalating. The skin responds with inflammation, swelling, and localized heat as the immune system floods the area. In many species, this is where the encounter ends, a painful lesson delivered through chemistry rather than force. But in others, particularly species like Lonomia, found in parts of South America, the venom operates on a far more dangerous level. Instead of remaining localized, certain caterpillar venoms interfere with the body's internal systems, targeting processes that are not immediately visible. Some compounds disrupt blood clotting, effectively turning minor contact into a systemic problem. The body loses its ability to regulate bleeding properly, creating a delayed and often misunderstood escalation of symptoms. What begins as a brush against bark can, hours later, develop into widespread bruising, internal bleeding, and severe physiological stress. This is not an exaggeration of their danger. It is a reflection of how evolution has optimized defense in a place where being eaten is constant pressure. A creature that cannot run or fight back physically, instead, makes itself costly to touch at all. What makes this strategy so effective is not just the venom itself, but how well it is hidden within the environment. Many venomous caterpillars exhibit extreme camouflage, blending seamlessly into the textures they inhabit. Some resemble patches of mold growing along tree trunks. Others mimic dead leaf fragments, complete with irregular edges and coloration that matches decay. Clustering behavior amplifies this illusion. A single caterpillar might be noticed, but dozens arranged together create a visual pattern that the brain interprets as background. The human eye, like that of many predators, is tuned to detect contrast and motion. When neither is present, recognition fails. This camouflage is not only a defense against predators, but also a passive trap for larger animals moving through the forest. Monkeys, for example, frequently navigate branches at speed, relying on grip and familiarity rather than constant visual inspection of every surface. A misjudged grab can bring the palm or fingers directly into contact with a cluster. The immediate reaction, pulling away, does not undo the damage. The spines have already broken, the venom already delivered. Similar interactions occur with birds that perch, reptiles that rest along branches, and even mammals that lean against trunks. The caterpillars do not need to target these animals. They simply exist in positions where contact is inevitable. There is also a subtle ecological layering to this system. Venomous caterpillars often occupy feeding zones rich in plant nutrients, particularly young leaves that are easier to digest. These areas are also frequented by other herbivores, increasing the likelihood of incidental encounters. At the same time, their toxicity reduces predation pressure from insectivorous species, allowing them to feed in relative security. Some birds and predators have learned to avoid them entirely, recognizing visual cues associated with their presence. Others attempt to consume them selectively, targeting non-venomous parts or employing techniques to remove spines before ingestion. These interactions create a dynamic balance, where the caterpillars are neither invulnerable nor easy prey, but something in between, a risk that must be managed. From a physiological perspective, the venom itself is a complex mixture of proteins and compounds designed to disrupt normal cellular function. In species with more advanced toxins, enzymes can break down tissue barriers, allowing deeper penetration into the bloodstream. Others trigger intense inflammatory responses, overwhelming local nerve endings and creating pain signals that are disproportionate to the size of the injury. This is not accidental. Pain, in this context, is a deterrent mechanism. It teaches avoidance quickly and effectively. An animal that experiences such a reaction is unlikely to repeat the mistake, giving the caterpillar a higher chance of surviving future encounters. The Amazon reinforces this strategy through its climate. High humidity keeps skin surfaces moist, increasing the likelihood that spines adhere and penetrate effectively. Warm temperatures accelerate physiological responses, making venom effects manifest faster. Frequent rainfall means that surfaces are often slick, encouraging slipping, grabbing, and unintentional contact. Every environmental factor contributes to a system where passive defenses become highly reliable. There is no need for precision timing or energy expenditure. The forest itself delivers the interaction. This is where the deeper lesson of the chapter emerges. The threat is not in the caterpillar alone, but in how it redefines the relationship between organism and environment. In many ecosystems, danger is associated with distinct, identifiable agents, predators that can be seen, heard, or tracked. In the Amazon, that boundary dissolves. The environment is not just a backdrop, but an active participant in survival dynamics. Surfaces carry consequences. Textures are not neutral. The act of touching becomes a decision with potential cost. There is a quiet irony in this system. The caterpillar, often considered one of the most vulnerable life stages of an insect, becomes one of the most deceptive. Its softness is an illusion. Its stillness is not weakness, but strategy. Even its clustering, which might seem like a risk by concentrating individuals in one place, actually enhances both camouflage and deterrence. A single contact event can involve dozens of spines from multiple individuals, amplifying the effect far beyond what one caterpillar could achieve alone. Predator-prey dynamics also shift around this presence. Animals that share the same space must adapt their behavior, developing more careful movement patterns or selective feeding strategies. Some species evolve tolerance to certain toxins, while others refine their sensory abilities to detect subtle differences in texture or scent. In this way, venomous caterpillars influence not just individual interactions, but the broader behavioral patterns of the ecosystem. They are small, but their impact radiates outward, shaping how other organisms move, feed, and survive. For a human observer moving through this environment, the implication is immediate and unsettling. The instinct to rely on sight is no longer sufficient. What appears safe may not be. What feels harmless may already be in the process of causing harm. The delay between contact and full symptom development adds another layer of uncertainty, making cause and effect harder to connect in real time. This is not a system built for clarity. It is built for efficiency from the perspective of the organism that cannot afford to be eaten. As the forest continues to close in around every movement, the realization settles in that danger here does not need to announce itself. It does not need speed, size, or aggression. It only needs proximity and the inevitability of contact. The caterpillar becomes the perfect introduction to this reality, not because it is the most powerful or the most lethal, but because it changes the rules before anything else has a chance to act. It teaches that in the Amazon, the first mistake is often not seeing what moves, but trusting what does not. The shift is immediate, and it is disarming. Where the forest previously taught caution through concealment, it now does the opposite. Color erupts from the leaf litter in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if something in the environment is demanding to be seen rather than avoided. On a damp patch of ground between fallen leaves and exposed roots, a small frog moves with slow, deliberate confidence, its body painted in saturated blues, yellows, or reds that seem too vivid to belong to a living organism. There is no attempt to blend in, no effort to hide. In a place where survival often depends on invisibility, this animal has abandoned camouflage entirely. That alone signals a different kind of strategy, one that does not rely on avoiding attention, but on controlling what attention leads to. Poison dart frogs represent one of the clearest examples of aposematism in the Amazon, a biological system where visibility itself becomes a defense. Their coloration is not decorative. It is instructional. Predators learn quickly that these patterns correlate with a negative experience, and the cost of ignoring that lesson can be immediate and severe. Unlike animals that must demonstrate their danger through behavior, through strikes, bites, or displays, these frogs communicate it passively through skin that functions as both signal and weapon. The message is simple but absolute. Contact carries consequence. The chemistry behind that message is what makes it credible. Poison dart frogs secrete alkaloid toxins through specialized skin glands, creating a continuous chemical barrier across their bodies. These compounds are not produced in isolation. They are derived from diet, primarily from consuming ants, mites, and other small arthropods that themselves contain toxic or bioactive chemicals. Through a process of sequestration, the frogs accumulate and modify these compounds, storing them in their skin in concentrations that can deter or disable predators. This is not a static system. The toxicity of an individual frog can vary depending on its diet, its environment, and its access to specific prey species. In captivity, where these dietary sources are absent, many poison dart frogs lose their toxicity entirely, becoming visually identical but chemically harmless. In the wild, however, the connection between diet and defense is intact, and the result is a living surface that is actively hostile to contact. What makes this system particularly effective is that it eliminates the need for timing. There is no moment of attack, no requirement to react quickly or accurately. The frog does not need to anticipate a predator's movement or defend itself through force. The act of being touched is enough. When a predator attempts to bite or even mouth the frog, toxins are absorbed through mucous membranes or small breaks in the skin, interfering with nerve function, muscle control, or cardiac rhythm, depending on the species and the compound involved. In some cases, even brief contact can create enough discomfort or dysfunction to ensure that the predator releases the frog immediately. In more extreme examples, such as those involving highly toxic species, the consequences can escalate to paralysis or death. This shifts the entire dynamic of predator-prey interaction. Instead of a contest of speed, strength, or stealth, the encounter becomes a test of recognition and restraint. Predators that have learned to associate bright coloration with toxicity will avoid these frogs entirely, often altering their hunting patterns to exclude them from consideration. This learning can occur through direct experience or through observation, as younger individuals witness the reactions of others. Over time, this creates a cultural transmission of avoidance behavior within certain species, reinforcing the effectiveness of the frog's visual signals. The forest becomes a place where color itself carries meaning, where certain patterns are read not as opportunity, but as warning. There is an efficiency to this system that extends beyond individual survival. By reducing the frequency of attacks, poison dart frogs conserve energy and minimize physical damage. They do not need to regenerate lost limbs or recover from repeated injuries. Their strategy is preventative rather than reactive. This also allows them to occupy ecological niches that might be inaccessible to less protected species. They can move more openly, forage during daylight hours, and exploit resources without the constant pressure of predation that shapes the behavior of many other small amphibians. Their habitat reflects this confidence. Poison dart frogs are often found in microenvironments that are rich in moisture and biological activity, such as leaf litter, low vegetation, and the water-filled axils of bromeliads. These spaces are dense with life, hosting insects, microorganisms, and other small animals that form the base of the food web. The frogs navigate this complexity with precision, using acute visual and chemical sensing to locate prey and suitable breeding sites. Their skin, while toxic, is also highly permeable, allowing for gas exchange and moisture absorption. This creates a constant balancing act between maintaining hydration and avoiding desiccation, particularly in a climate where conditions can shift rapidly between heavy rainfall and intense heat. Reproductive behavior adds another layer to their ecological role. Many poison dart frog species exhibit parental care that is rare among amphibians. Males often guard eggs laid on leaves or in sheltered locations, ensuring they remain moist and protected from predators. Once the eggs hatch, one parent, typically the male in some species, transports the tadpoles on its back to small pools of water, often in bromeliads or tree holes. These isolated water bodies provide a safer environment, free from many of the larger aquatic predators found in streams and rivers. In some species, the female returns periodically to deposit unfertilized eggs as a food source for the developing tadpoles, creating a direct nutritional link between parent and offspring. This level of investment increases the survival rate of the young, reinforcing the population's stability in a competitive ecosystem. The toxins that define these frogs also influence their interactions with parasites and pathogens. Some studies suggest that the chemical compounds present in their skin may provide a degree of protection against microbial infections, reducing the impact of diseases that affect other amphibian populations. This is particularly relevant in the context of global declines in amphibian numbers due to fungal infections such as chytridiomycosis. While poison dart frogs are not immune to such threats, their unique physiology may offer partial resistance, highlighting the broader implications of their chemical defenses. Despite their potency, poison dart frogs are not entirely without predators. Certain species have evolved resistance to their toxins, allowing them to exploit a food source that is unavailable to others. These specialized predators often possess physiological adaptations that neutralize or tolerate the alkaloids, creating a narrow but significant pathway through which the frogs remain part of the food web. This ongoing evolutionary interaction underscores the dynamic nature of their defense system. It is not an absolute shield, but a highly effective filter that reduces predation to a manageable level. From a sensory perspective, the frog's reliance on visual signaling is complemented by their behavior. They often move in a way that enhances visibility, positioning themselves on exposed surfaces or adopting postures that maximize the display of their coloration. This is not random movement. It is a form of communication, reinforcing the association between appearance and consequence. The environment itself supports this strategy, with filtered light creating contrasts that make bright colors stand out even in the dense understory. What might seem like a chaotic mix of greens and browns becomes a structured visual field where certain patterns are immediately recognizable. There is also an interesting interplay between their toxicity and the concept of mimicry. In some regions, non-toxic or less toxic species evolve coloration that closely resembles that of highly toxic poison dart frogs. This Batesian mimicry allows them to benefit from the established warning signals without bearing the metabolic cost of producing or sequestering toxins. However, this system is fragile. If too many non-toxic mimics enter the population, predators may begin to question the reliability of the signal, potentially increasing the risk for all species involved. The balance between honest signaling and deceptive imitation is maintained through complex ecological pressures, ensuring that the visual language of the forest remains functional. For a human observer, the lesson is both clear and counterintuitive. The instinct to admire, to approach, or even to touch such a vividly colored animal can override caution, particularly in an environment where beauty is often associated with safety. Poison dart frogs invert that expectation completely. Their appeal is not a sign of harmlessness, but a declaration of the opposite. The danger does not lie in an aggressive act, but in the simple act of contact. Handling, even briefly, can transfer toxins to the skin, where they may enter the body through cuts, mucous membranes, or inadvertent ingestion. This reinforces the broader theme introduced earlier. In the Amazon, the surface itself can be weaponized. But where venomous caterpillars rely on deception and concealment, poison dart frogs achieve the same outcome through exposure and clarity. One hides the threat until it is too late. The other announces it in advance and relies on that announcement being understood. Both strategies converge on the same principle, that the body does not need to bite to be dangerous. It only needs to make contact costly enough that the interaction ends in its favor. As the frog continues its measured movement across the forest floor, its presence becomes less surprising and more instructive. It is not just an isolated example of toxicity, but a demonstration of how evolution can reshape the relationship between appearance and function. In a landscape where survival often depends on avoiding detection, this small amphibian has taken the opposite path, turning visibility into a shield and its own skin into a boundary that cannot be crossed without consequence. The forest does not always give you time to understand what you have done wrong. Sometimes the consequence arrives first, and the explanation follows only after the body has already reacted. In the low, root-tangled margins of the Amazon floor, where fallen trunks soften into soil and living trees push their buttress roots outward like slow-moving architecture, there are structures that appear stable, even inviting to lean against or step over. Bark textures break into familiar patterns. Roots create natural footholds. Nothing suggests volatility. But within these surfaces, hidden in cavities, under bark plates, and inside soil-packed chambers, entire colonies of ants exist in a state of constant readiness. Among them is one of the most notorious, the bullet ant, a species that does not rely on numbers alone, but on the precision and intensity of what each individual can deliver. A single bullet ant, Paraponera clavata, is large by ant standards, its body heavy, deliberate, and armored in a way that suggests resilience rather than speed. It does not move with the frantic energy typical of smaller ants. Instead, it patrols with a controlled, almost measured pace, using antennae to sample the chemical landscape of the forest surface. That calm exterior, however, is not a sign of passivity. It is part of a system designed around escalation. The colony does not waste energy reacting to every minor disturbance, but when a threshold is crossed, when vibrations, chemical cues, or physical contact indicate a credible threat, the response is immediate and coordinated. The trigger can be almost trivial. A hand placed on the wrong section of bark, a boot pressing into a root cavity, a branch disturbed during movement through dense vegetation. These actions send vibrations through the structure of the tree or the soil, signals that travel far more efficiently than sight in this environment. At the same time, any direct contact releases alarm pheromones from the disturbed ants, chemical messages that spread rapidly across the colony. Within seconds, what was a quiet surface becomes active. Ants emerge from openings that were invisible moments before, orienting toward the source of disturbance with a clarity that suggests purpose rather than randomness. The first contact is often the most instructive. A bullet ant does not bite to injure in the traditional sense. Its mandibles are used to anchor, to hold position. The real weapon is the sting, delivered through a stinger capable of penetrating skin with ease. When it engages, it does so with precision, inserting the stinger and injecting venom directly into tissue. The sensation that follows is not subtle. It is immediate, intense, and spreading, often described as one of the most painful insect stings known. But the description of pain, while accurate, does not fully capture the biological effect. The venom is designed to disrupt the normal function of nerve cells, interfering with the transmission of signals in a way that amplifies and prolongs the sensation far beyond the initial injection. This is where the system reveals its true efficiency. The body does not differentiate between sources of neural overload. Whether the signal originates from a bite, a burn, or a sting becomes irrelevant once the nervous system is saturated. Pain becomes the dominant input, overriding coordination, focus, and controlled movement. Muscles may tense or weaken. Reflexes become exaggerated or delayed. Breathing can shift as the body responds to stress. In isolation, a single sting is already enough to create a significant physiological reaction. But bullet ants do not operate in isolation when defending their colony. As more ants converge, the likelihood of repeated stings increases rapidly. Each individual acts independently, but within a shared framework of chemical communication. Alarm pheromones continue to be released, reinforcing the response and guiding additional ants toward the target. The effect is cumulative. Multiple stings do not simply add pain, they compound it, creating overlapping waves of neural disruption that can extend across larger areas of the body. The initial contact point may be localized, but as ants move and reposition, the zone of impact expands. What began as a single mistake becomes a distributed event, with multiple points of contact delivering the same disruptive signal. This collective defense strategy is not random aggression. It is a finely tuned response shaped by the ecological pressures of the rainforest. Bullet ants nest in environments where predation and competition are constant. Their colonies are valuable resources containing brood, stored nutrients, and a complex social structure that cannot be easily replaced. Defending that investment requires a system that can deter a wide range of threats, from small predators to larger animals that might inadvertently damage the nest. The sting, in this context, is a universal deterrent. It does not rely on the size or type of the intruder. It relies on the shared vulnerability of nervous systems across species. There is also a temporal dimension to their defense. The intensity of the sting ensures that the memory of the encounter persists long after the physical symptoms subside. Animals that experience such an event are likely to avoid similar structures or locations in the future, reducing the frequency of repeated disturbances. This creates a form of spatial learning within the ecosystem where certain areas become known as high-risk zones. The ants do not need to mark these areas visually. The experience itself is enough to encode the information in the behavior of other organisms. From a physiological standpoint, the venom of bullet ants contains peptides that target ion channels in nerve cells, altering the flow of ions that underlie electrical signaling. This disruption leads to the prolonged activation of pain pathways, creating a sensation that can last for hours rather than minutes. The body's response involves not only the perception of pain, but also a cascade of stress-related reactions, including the release of hormones that prepare the organism to cope with injury. In a natural context, this can translate into erratic movement, reduced coordination, and a temporary inability to perform normal behaviors, all of which can increase vulnerability to other threats in the environment. Despite their formidable defense, bullet ants are not indiscriminate killers. Their behavior is highly context-dependent. Outside of defensive situations, they forage for food, often targeting nectar, small arthropods, and other resources that sustain the colony. Their role in the ecosystem extends beyond defense. By interacting with plants and other insects, they contribute to nutrient cycling and the regulation of populations within their habitat. Some plants may even benefit from their presence, gaining a degree of protection from herbivores due to the ants' aggressive response to disturbances. There is a subtle interplay between the ants and their environment that goes beyond immediate defense. The structure of their nests, often integrated into tree roots or soil, influences how water flows and how organic material accumulates. Their foraging paths create networks that intersect with those of other species, leading to encounters that shape behavior on both sides. Even their alarm pheromones, while primarily used for communication within the colony, can affect the behavior of other insects, creating temporary zones of altered activity where certain species avoid or respond to the chemical signals. For humans moving through this environment, the lesson becomes unavoidable. The forest is not passive, and it does not require large predators to assert its presence. A single misstep, a misplaced hand, or an unnoticed colony entrance can trigger a response that is disproportionate to the initial action. The absence of visible threat does not equate to safety. In fact, the most stable-looking structures, solid trunks, anchored roots, undisturbed branches, can conceal some of the most immediate dangers. There is a certain clarity to the role of bullet ants within the broader narrative of the Amazon. They strip away the illusion that danger must be dramatic to be effective. There is no ambush in the traditional sense, no chase, no visible escalation before the event. Instead, there is a threshold, and once it is crossed, the response is absolute. The colony becomes a single, distributed organism, capable of delivering a concentrated experience that overwhelms the senses and forces immediate retreat. This reinforces the central idea that has been building across the chapters. The Amazon does not rely on one method of harm. It employs a spectrum of strategies, each optimized for different conditions and constraints. Venomous caterpillars hide their defenses within the surface, turning contact into a delayed consequence. Poison dart frogs advertise their toxicity, making their bodies untouchable through visibility. Bullet ants occupy a different position in this spectrum. They do not wait passively, nor do they rely solely on warning. They respond, and when they do, they convert a moment of disturbance into a cascade of neural disruption that the body cannot easily ignore. As the activity around the disturbed area gradually subsides, the ants return to their routines, the surface once again appearing stable and uneventful. The forest closes over the event with remarkable speed, leaving little visual trace of what occurred. But the absence of visible change does not erase the lesson. It lingers in the body, in the memory of sensation, and in the altered behavior that follows. In this environment, survival is not just about recognizing predators. It is about understanding that the line between surface and threat is often non-existent, and that some of the most effective defenses are those that do not need to bite at all. The rainforest at night has a way of lowering expectations in the wrong direction. Movement slows, sounds stretch out, and shapes become less defined under the dim layering of reflected moisture and filtered moonlight. It becomes easier to overlook what does not immediately signal urgency. A large, heavy-bodied amphibian sitting motionless on the forest floor does not register as a threat in the same way a snake coiled in shadow or a predator moving through foliage might. It does not pursue. It does not stalk. It does not even attempt to conceal itself beyond the natural dullness of its skin. Yet this stillness is not vulnerability. It is the endpoint of a different survival strategy, one that replaces speed and aggression with something far more efficient, the ability to make contact itself a mistake. The marine toad, Rhinella marina, carries its defense externally in a way that is both blunt and highly effective. Its body is broad, low to the ground, and covered in thick glandular skin that appears rough and uneven, almost unfinished in texture. Behind the eyes, two elongated swellings rise slightly above the surface, parotoid glands, structures that define the animal's defensive identity. These glands are reservoirs of chemical compounds that can be deployed with minimal effort, requiring no precise targeting, no timing beyond proximity, and no active pursuit of a threat. The toad does not need to reach out. It needs only to be contacted. In the humid stillness of the Amazon night, the toad's physiology is tuned to operate within narrow environmental constraints. Amphibian skin is permeable, allowing for gas exchange and moisture absorption, but also making the animal vulnerable to desiccation and environmental toxins. The marine toad balances this sensitivity with a protective system that is both chemical and structural. The skin is thick enough to retain moisture while housing glands capable of producing and storing potent toxins. This dual function reflects a deeper evolutionary compromise. To survive in an environment where exposure is constant, the body must both interact with and defend against that exposure simultaneously. When undisturbed, the toad moves with slow, deliberate motions, conserving energy and minimizing unnecessary activity. It feeds opportunistically, consuming insects, small vertebrates, and organic matter that falls within reach. Its metabolic rate is adapted to this low-energy lifestyle, allowing it to persist in conditions where more active animals would expend too much energy searching for food. This apparent sluggishness can be misleading. It suggests a lack of urgency, a creature that relies on avoidance rather than confrontation. But this interpretation fails to account for the fact that the toad's defense does not depend on movement at all. The moment of interaction, when it occurs, is rarely initiated by the toad. A predator approaches, driven by hunger or curiosity, interpreting the toad's size and lack of speed as an opportunity. Mammals, birds, and reptiles have all been observed investigating or attempting to consume these amphibians, particularly in environments where prey availability fluctuates. The initial contact may be a bite, a grasp, or even a probing touch. It is at this point that the toad's chemical defense activates, not through a dramatic discharge, but through a simple and immediate release of toxin from the parotoid glands. The secretion is milky, viscous, and rich in compounds that target critical physiological systems. Among these are bufotoxins, a group of chemicals that can interfere with cardiac function, disrupt nerve signaling, and induce intense irritation. The delivery mechanism is passive but effective. Pressure applied to the glands, whether from a bite or handling, forces the toxin outward, coating the area of contact. In many cases, the toxin is transferred directly into the mouth of the predator, where it interacts with mucous membranes, rapidly entering the bloodstream or affecting local nerve endings. The reaction is often immediate and unmistakable. Predators that attempt to consume a marine toad frequently release it within seconds, exhibiting signs of distress that range from excessive salivation to disorientation, and, in more severe cases, loss of motor control. The body responds to the toxin as a systemic threat, triggering a cascade of physiological reactions that prioritize survival but disrupt normal function. In smaller animals, or in cases where a significant amount of toxin is ingested, the effects can be lethal. In larger animals, the experience is often sufficient to create a lasting aversion, reinforcing avoidance behavior that benefits the toad without requiring repeated defense. What makes this system particularly effective is its reliability. Unlike a bite, which requires accuracy and timing, or a sting, which depends on positioning, the marine toad's defense is activated by the very act of being handled. It does not matter where the predator makes contact. The glands are positioned in a way that ensures exposure during most forms of interaction. This reduces the margin for error, allowing the toad to defend itself against a wide range of threats without needing to adapt its response to each specific encounter. There is also a sensory dimension to this defense that extends beyond immediate toxicity. The taste and smell of the secretion are often enough to deter further interaction. Predators that survive an initial encounter may avoid similar prey in the future based on these sensory cues alone. This creates a feedback loop within the ecosystem where the presence of toxic individuals influences predator behavior on a broader scale. The toad becomes not just an individual organism, but a signal that propagates through the behavior of other species. The ecological implications of this strategy are significant. By reducing predation pressure, marine toads can occupy a wide range of habitats within the Amazon, from forest floors to disturbed areas near water bodies. Their ability to tolerate varying environmental conditions, combined with their chemical defense, allows them to persist in niches that might be inaccessible to less protected amphibians. This adaptability is further supported by their reproductive strategy, which involves producing large numbers of eggs, increasing the likelihood that some will survive to maturity despite environmental challenges. At the same time, their presence influences the structure of the ecosystem. As both predators and prey, they contribute to the regulation of insect populations and serve as a food source for species that have evolved resistance to their toxins. Some predators, such as certain snakes, have developed the ability to consume toxic amphibians without suffering the same level of physiological disruption. These interactions highlight the ongoing evolutionary arms race that shapes the dynamics of the rainforest, where defense and counter-defense evolve in parallel. From a physiological standpoint, the production and storage of toxins represent a significant metabolic investment. The compounds must be synthesized or derived from dietary sources, processed and maintained within specialized glands. This requires energy and resources that could otherwise be allocated to growth or reproduction. The fact that this investment persists across generations indicates the effectiveness of the strategy. The cost is outweighed by the survival advantage conferred by the ability to deter a wide range of predators with minimal physical effort. There is an understated irony in how the marine toad presents itself. Its appearance is often described as unattractive, its movements unremarkable, its presence easy to ignore. In an environment where many animals rely on striking colors, rapid motion, or elaborate displays to signal their capabilities, the toad does none of these. It does not advertise its toxicity in the same way a poison dart frog does. It does not hide with the precision of a caterpillar or bury itself like a stingray. Instead, it exists in plain view, relying on the consequences of interaction rather than the prevention of it. For a human observer, this creates a different kind of risk. The lack of obvious warning signals can lead to underestimation. Handling, curiosity, or even accidental contact can result in exposure to the toxin, particularly if it comes into contact with eyes, mouth, or open skin. While the effects on humans are typically less severe than on smaller animals, they can still include irritation, nausea, and other symptoms that reflect the underlying potency of the compounds involved. The lesson is consistent with the broader pattern of the Amazon. What appears manageable at a glance may operate under a completely different set of rules upon contact. This final chapter brings the underlying theme into its most direct form. The marine toad does not need speed, precision, or aggression to survive. It does not need to bite, sting, or pursue. Its defense is embedded in its body chemistry, activated by the simplest of interactions. It represents a culmination of the strategies explored throughout the ecosystem, where the boundary between organism and weapon becomes indistinct, and where survival is achieved not by overpowering a threat, but by making the act of engagement itself too costly to continue. As the night deepens and the humidity thickens, the toad remains where it is, a quiet presence in a landscape that continues to shift and respond around it. Insects move through the air, drawn to moisture and organic decay. Predators pass through, guided by scent and sound, adjusting their behavior based on experience and instinct. The toad does not need to react to each of these movements. It has already established its terms. In this environment where so much depends on timing and action, it has chosen a different path, one where the outcome is determined not by what it does, but by what it is. The forest floor at night feels less like a surface and more like a living layer of shifting signals. Moisture gathers on decaying leaves, fungal threads lace through the soil, and every step presses into a network of hidden activity. In this dim, low-visibility world, where vision is limited and vibration becomes a primary language, certain animals have evolved to read disturbance with remarkable precision. Among them, the tarantula occupies a position that is often misunderstood. Its size draws attention, its movement carries weight, and its fangs dominate perception. But the most effective part of its defense does not depend on biting at all. It begins before contact, before proximity even becomes dangerous, and often before the threat fully understands that it has been detected. A large Amazonian tarantula, such as Theraposa blondi, moves slowly across the forest floor, each step deliberate, each contact with the substrate transmitting subtle vibrations outward. Its body is dense and grounded, adapted for a life spent in burrows, under logs, and within the layered debris of the rainforest. The legs extend outward like a low frame, maximizing surface contact and sensory input. Fine hairs cover not only the abdomen but much of the body, each serving a role in detecting air currents, vibrations, and chemical cues. This is not an animal that relies heavily on sight. Instead, it interprets the environment through touch at a scale that larger animals often overlook. When undisturbed, the tarantula is a predator of opportunity, feeding on insects, small vertebrates, and other invertebrates that cross its path. It uses speed in short bursts, combined with precise control of its fangs, to subdue prey quickly. But predation is only one part of its ecological role. Equally important is its ability to avoid becoming prey itself. In a rainforest filled with birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, a large, slow-moving spider represents both a potential meal and a potential risk. Its survival depends on a defense system that can deter threats before physical engagement becomes necessary. The first layer of that defense is posture. When a tarantula perceives a disturbance that exceeds normal background activity, vibrations that suggest a large animal, a sudden shift in air pressure, or direct contact with its body, it does not immediately flee. Instead, it often turns to face the source and raises its front legs, exposing its fangs in a display that is both visual and mechanical. This posture increases the apparent size of the spider and signals readiness. The fangs themselves are large, capable of delivering venom, but the display serves a purpose beyond immediate attack. It communicates that escalation is possible, that further approach carries risk. However, the tarantula's most distinctive defensive mechanism lies not in its fangs, but in the specialized hairs covering its abdomen. These are not ordinary hairs. They are urticating setae, microscopic barbed structures that can be released into the air when the spider engages in a specific behavior. By rapidly rubbing its hind legs against its abdomen, the tarantula dislodges these hairs, sending them outward in a fine cloud that can travel short distances through the air. To the naked eye, this action may appear subtle, almost insignificant. But the effect it creates is anything but minor. When these hairs come into contact with skin, they embed themselves due to their barbed structure, resisting removal and causing irritation. The immediate sensation can range from mild itching to a burning discomfort, depending on the species and the sensitivity of the individual. More critically, when these hairs reach sensitive areas such as the eyes, nose, or mouth, the reaction can intensify dramatically. In the eyes, they can cause severe irritation, tearing, and even temporary impairment of vision. In mucous membranes, they can trigger inflammation and discomfort that persists well beyond the initial contact. This mechanism operates at a different level than venom. It does not require penetration into deeper tissue. It does not rely on chemical compounds circulating through the bloodstream. Instead, it exploits the sensitivity of the body's outer interfaces, targeting the surfaces that are most exposed and most reactive. The result is a defensive system that can affect a threat at a distance, creating a barrier that discourages approach without the need for direct physical engagement. The effectiveness of this strategy becomes clearer when viewed in the context of the rainforest environment. Air movement in the understory is often minimal, allowing fine particles to remain suspended longer than they might in more open habitats. High humidity can cause these hairs to adhere more readily to surfaces, increasing the likelihood of contact. The dense vegetation limits escape routes, meaning that a predator encountering a defensive tarantula may not have the option to simply bypass the area without exposure. In this setting, a cloud of urticating hairs becomes a localized hazard, transforming a small patch of ground into a zone of discomfort and risk. Predators that have experienced this defense learn quickly. Birds that attempt to capture a tarantula may receive a face full of irritating hairs, leading to immediate release and avoidance. Mammals that investigate too closely may retreat, rubbing their faces or paws in an attempt to remove the embedded setae. Even reptiles, with their different sensory systems, can be affected by the irritation, altering their behavior in response. Over time, these interactions shape predator behavior, reducing the frequency of attacks and reinforcing the tarantula's position within the ecosystem. There is an important distinction here that elevates this chapter beyond a simple description of defense. The tarantula does not rely on a single mechanism. It layers its responses, escalating only as necessary. Initial detection leads to orientation and posture. If the threat persists, the spider may deploy urticating hairs, creating a deterrent at a distance. Only if these measures fail does it resort to biting, using its fangs and venom as a final line of defense. This tiered system conserves energy, minimizes risk, and allows the spider to manage a range of threats with appropriate responses. From a physiological perspective, the production of urticating hairs represents a significant investment. These structures must be regenerated after they are used, requiring resources that could otherwise be allocated to growth or reproduction. This cost is offset by the effectiveness of the defense. By preventing repeated attacks, the tarantula reduces the likelihood of injury and the need for more energetically expensive responses. The balance between cost and benefit is maintained through the frequency and context in which the hairs are deployed. The ecological role of tarantulas extends beyond their interactions with predators. As predators themselves, they help regulate populations of insects and small vertebrates, contributing to the balance of the forest floor community. Their burrows, often constructed in soft soil or beneath logs, create micro-habitats that can be used by other organisms once abandoned. These structures influence soil composition, moisture retention, and the distribution of organic material. In this way, the presence of tarantulas affects not only individual interactions, but also the physical and biological structure of their environment. There are also less obvious relationships that emerge from their behavior. Certain species of small frogs have been observed sharing burrows with tarantulas, benefiting from the protection provided by the spider's presence while offering potential advantages in return, such as consuming parasites or small insects that might otherwise affect the spider or its eggs. These associations highlight the complexity of ecological networks in the rainforest, where even organisms that appear solitary can be part of broader, interconnected systems. For a human observer, the experience of encountering a tarantula is often dominated by visual impact. The size, the movement, the posture all contribute to a perception of immediate threat. But the real danger, in most cases, lies not in a sudden bite, but in the less visible aspects of the spider's defense. A person who approaches too closely, disturbs the spider, or attempts to handle it may not be bitten at all. Instead, they may find themselves exposed to a cloud of urticating hairs, experiencing irritation that builds and persists in ways that are difficult to ignore. This reinforces the central theme in a more nuanced way. The tarantula does not need to bite to assert control over its interaction with larger animals. It can create discomfort, confusion, and retreat through a mechanism that operates before contact escalates to direct aggression. The body responds to irritation and sensory overload just as it responds to pain, adjusting behavior to minimize further exposure. In this sense, the tarantula's defense is not only physical but also behavioral, shaping the actions of other organisms through experience. As the forest settles back into its nocturnal rhythm, the tarantula lowers its posture, its front legs returning to the ground, its abdomen no longer engaged in defensive motion. The cloud of hairs disperses, becoming part of the invisible particulate matter that moves through the understory. The immediate threat fades, but the lesson remains embedded in the experience of those who encountered it. In the Amazon, danger does not always arrive as a single decisive action. Sometimes it begins with a warning, escalates through layers of response, and only reaches its most extreme form if all else fails. The tarantula embodies this progression with clarity. It demonstrates that the absence of a bite does not equate to the absence of harm. It shows that defense can be proactive, that discomfort can be weaponized, and that the boundary between safety and danger is often defined not by what an animal does at the final moment, but by what it can do long before that moment is ever reached. The river does not announce its depth in the Amazon. It does not always signal where it is safe to step, or where the ground gives way beneath the surface. Instead, it spreads outward into floodplains, pools, and slow-moving channels where water and land blur into each other. What appears to be a shallow, stable margin is often a shifting interface of sand, silt, and organic debris, constantly rearranged by current, rainfall, and the movement of animals. It is here, in these transitional zones, that one of the most understated but physically decisive dangers of the rainforest exists. There is no sound, no visible warning, no movement that draws attention. only the quiet presence of a body that has already positioned itself beneath the surface, waiting not to attack, but to avoid being seen at all. Freshwater stingrays in the Amazon are specialists in concealment. Their bodies are flattened into broad discs that press seamlessly against the riverbed, their coloration matching the tones of sand, mud, and leaf-stained sediment with remarkable accuracy. Fine particles settle across their backs, further blending them into the substrate until the distinction between animal and environment dissolves completely. Only the eyes and spiracles remain slightly elevated, small openings that allow the ray to monitor its surroundings and draw in water for respiration without exposing itself. Even these features are subtle, easily missed in water that is often clouded by tannins and suspended material. To an observer above the surface, there is nothing to indicate that a living organism lies directly beneath the footstep about to be taken. This strategy is not designed for ambush in the way that many river predators operate. Stingrays do feed on small fish, crustaceans, and other bottom-dwelling organisms, using their electroreceptive abilities to detect the faint electrical signals produced by muscle activity. But their primary defense is not pursuit. It is avoidance through invisibility. By remaining still and buried, they reduce the likelihood of being detected by larger predators, including caimans and other aquatic hunters. The problem arises when this concealment intersects with the movement of larger animals that do not share the same sensory capabilities or do not expect the riverbed itself to be occupied. A step into shallow water is a routine action, repeated countless times by animals crossing, drinking, or foraging along the margins. The foot presses downward, displacing sand and silt, creating a brief cloud of suspended particles. In most cases, this disturbance has no consequence beyond the shifting of substrate. But when that pressure lands directly on the body of a stingray, the response is immediate and reflexive. The ray does not have time to relocate or escape. Its body is pinned, even momentarily, and the only available option is to deploy the structure that has evolved specifically for this scenario. The tail of a freshwater stingray is long, muscular, and equipped with one or more serrated spines, each capable of delivering both mechanical damage and venom. These spines are not passive. They are actively controlled, able to be raised and driven upward with significant force. When the ray is stepped on or otherwise compressed, the tail whips in a rapid upward arc, bringing the spine into contact with whatever is applying the pressure. The motion is fast enough that it often occurs before the stepping animal fully registers what it has touched. The result is a puncture wound that is both deep and irregular, as the serrations along the spine can tear tissue during entry and, in some cases, during withdrawal. The physical injury is only part of the problem. Along the spine are glands that secrete venom, which is introduced into the wound during the strike. This venom is not designed to kill large animals outright, but to create an immediate and overwhelming physiological response. Pain is the primary effect, intense and rapidly spreading from the point of contact. Unlike the diffuse burn of a caterpillar or the systemic signaling of a dart frog's toxins, the stingray's venom operates in conjunction with physical trauma. The body is forced to process both at once: a deep puncture disrupting tissue integrity and a chemical signal amplifying pain and inflammation. In the unstable environment of shallow water, this combination becomes particularly dangerous. The initial reaction to sudden severe pain is often reflexive movement, pulling away, shifting weight, attempting to regain balance. But in water where footing is already uncertain, These reactions can lead to loss of stability. The silt cloud created by the initial step expands, reducing visibility further. The body's focus narrows to the site of injury, while the surrounding environment becomes harder to interpret. This moment of confusion can be critical. Falling into deeper water, stepping onto another hidden surface, or making uncontrolled movements increases the risk of additional injury or exposure to other hazards. There is a cascading effect to this interaction that extends beyond the immediate wound. The venom's impact on nerve endings creates a sustained pain response that can last for hours, sometimes longer. This prolonged signal interferes with normal behavior, making it difficult to move efficiently, to assess surroundings, or to respond to new stimuli. In an ecosystem where threats can come from multiple directions, both above and below the waterline, this temporary impairment can have broader consequences. The stingray does not need to pursue or incapacitate its target beyond this point. The disruption itself is sufficient to create distance and discourage further contact. From an ecological perspective, this defensive strategy is highly efficient. Stingrays occupy a niche where they are both predators and potential prey, requiring a balance between feeding and avoiding detection. Their camouflage allows them to conserve energy by remaining still, reducing the need for constant movement in search of food. At the same time, their electroreception enables them to detect prey even when buried, turning the riverbed into an active sensory field. The tail spine, in turn, provides a means of defense that does not compromise their primary mode of existence. They do not need to reveal themselves to deter a threat. The interaction occurs only when concealment fails, and even then it is brief and decisive. There are also seasonal dynamics that influence their behavior. During periods of flooding, when rivers expand into surrounding forests, stingrays move into newly inundated areas, following the distribution of prey. This increases the likelihood of encounters with terrestrial animals that are not accustomed to sharing space with aquatic species. Conversely, during the dry season, when water levels recede, stingrays become concentrated in remaining pools and channels, potentially increasing their density in accessible areas. These shifts create changing patterns of risk within the environment, where locations that were safe at one time may become hazardous at another. Interactions with other species further illustrate the role of stingrays within the ecosystem. Some predators have developed strategies to handle them, targeting specific parts of the body or avoiding the tail entirely. Large fish and certain mammals may exploit moments when the ray is exposed or disoriented. However, these interactions require precision and experience. For most animals, the cost of a mistake is too high, reinforcing avoidance behavior and allowing stingrays to maintain their position within the food web. There is an understated irony in how this danger presents itself. Unlike the visual clarity of a poison dart frog or the immediate aggression of a bullet ant colony, the stingray offers no external cue that can be easily interpreted. Its effectiveness lies in its absence from perception. The river appears calm, the substrate stable, the surface undisturbed. The threat is integrated so completely into the environment that it ceases to be recognized as separate. This is not deception in the sense of mimicry or warning. It is a deeper form of integration where the line between organism and habitat disappears entirely. For humans navigating these waters, the implications are direct and physical. The instinct to move quickly through shallow areas, to trust the apparent solidity of the ground beneath the water, becomes a liability. The lack of visibility means that each step carries uncertainty. Traditional cues, sight, sound, even the behavior of other animals, offer limited guidance. Instead, avoidance strategies must adapt, emphasizing careful movement, awareness of substrate, and an understanding that the riverbed is not inert. This chapter reinforces the central theme by grounding it in a tangible, physical interaction. The stingray does not need to bite, chase, or even reveal itself to exert control over its environment. It relies on positioning, on the inevitability of contact, and on a response that transforms a single moment of pressure into a decisive event. The weapon is not in the mouth, but in the tail. The attack is not initiated by the predator, but by the victim's own movement. As the silt settles and the water returns to its previous clarity, the stingray resumes its position, burying itself once more beneath the surface. The environment closes over it, restoring the illusion of simplicity and safety. Nothing appears to have changed. Yet the reality beneath that surface remains intact, a reminder that in the Amazon, the most consequential interactions often begin with something as simple and as unavoidable as a step in the wrong place.